He just wanted to give his daughter a better life. But when he took a second job working the night shift at a massive warehouse he never imagined, the quiet woman sweeping floors beside him was the billionaire who owned the entire company. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching? From the fluorescent lights of the Vance Fulfillment Center hummed a low, relentless tune, a sound that sank into your bones and stayed there. Long after the shift ended, Leo Ramirez felt it in his teeth as he scanned another box, the digital beep of his device adding a frantic counterpoint to the warehouse's drone. It was 2 a.m. The dead of night, when the world outside slept, and the world inside this cavernous metal box moved at a frantic pace. This was his second job, his second life. A world away from the sunlit afternoon spent fixing leaky faucets and patching drywall as a handyman, a world he'd stepped into 6 months ago when his daughter Mia's medical bills started piling up like unshoveled snow. He'd promised her a life without worry, and this was the price a life lived in. 2 different time zones fueled by cheap coffee, and the fading photograph of a smiling 7-year-old girl taped inside his locker. He pushed a heavy cart of outbound packages toward the loading bay, his shoulders aching with a familiar fire. His thoughts drifted to Mia asleep in their small apartment, under the watchful eye of their neighbor, Mrs. Prime Gable. He imagined her tucked in with her stuffed rabbit Bartholomew, its one good eye staring into the dark. He pictured her dreaming of things that didn't involve copays or late notices. Or a father who smelled perpetually of cardboard and exhaustion. The warehouse was a universe of its own, filled with people who kept their heads down and their histories to themselves. No one asked questions, no one made small talk. They were ghosts in high-visibility vests moving through the night in shared anonymity. Leo preferred it that way. It was easier to disappear into the work when no one knew the weight you were carrying. But tonight, there was someone new, a woman he hadn't seen before. She was sweeping the floor near the packing stations, her movements slow and deliberate, out of sync with the urgent rhythm of the warehouse. She was older than most of the kids who took this job, maybe in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back into a simple knot that had already started to come undone. She wore the same standard-issue vest as everyone else, but it hung on her small frame like a borrowed coat. She kept her eyes on the floor, her expression unreadable, a quiet island in a sea of noise and motion. The shift supervisor, a man named Mark with a clipboard and a permanent scowl, barked at her as he passed. "Pick up the pace, Ellie. We're not paying you to take a nap with a broom." The woman flinched but didn't look up. She just swept a little faster, her silence a shield against his sharp-edged words. Leo watched from across the aisle, a familiar anger stirring in his gut. Mark was a small man who enjoyed the small power his position gave him, and he always aimed it at the quietest people, the ones who wouldn't fight back. Leo knew he should keep his head down, should just keep moving. The first rule of the warehouse was to remain invisible, but then he saw the woman's hands trembling slightly as she gripped the broom, and something in him broke the rule. He walked over, stopping his cart between her and the supervisors, retreating back. "Hey," he said, softly. She looked up. Startled, her eyes were a deep, weary blue, and for a second he saw something in them. He recognized a loneliness that had nothing to do with being in a crowded room. "He's a jerk," Leo added with a shrug. "Don't let him get to you." The woman offered a small, grateful smile, a flicker of warmth in the cold, fluorescent light. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. He nodded and went back to his cart, the brief exchange costing him precious seconds on his quota. But as he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just seen someone more out of place than he was. And for the first time in a long time, he wondered about another ghost in the machine. The brake horn blared at 3 a.m. A jarring sound that signaled 15 minutes of reprieve. The warehouse floor emptied in seconds, workers flocking to the sterile break room with its vending machines and worn plastic chairs. Leo bypassed the crowd, heading for a quiet corner. Near the loading dock, where the air was cooler and the hum of the machinery was muted, he sank onto an overturned pallet and pulled out his dinner: a squashed peanut butter sandwich and an apple bruised from the journey in his backpack. Ate slowly, savoring the silence as much as the food. A few minutes later he saw her. The new woman he'd learned was named Ellie. She stood uncertainly by the doorway of the break room, looking in at the packed tables before turning away. With a quiet sigh of defeat, she hadn't brought any food, and the vending machine that took cards was broken again. She walked toward the exit, her shoulders slumped just enough to make her look smaller than she already was. Leo watched her for a moment, then called out, "Hey, Ellie." She turned, surprised to be addressed, her eyes wide and guarded. "Over here," he gestured to the empty space on the pallet beside him. She hesitated, biting her lip like she was weighing the risk of interaction against the certainty of isolation. "It's okay," he said gently. "I don't bite, and this spot has the best view of a concrete wall in the entire facility." That coaxed a small smile from her. She walked over and sat down carefully, leaving a respectful distance between them. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them, as if to ward off a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "You didn't get anything to eat?" he asked, stating the obvious. She shook her head. "I forgot my wallet at home. Rookie mistake." He nodded. Then, without a second thought, he broke his sandwich in half and held out a piece to her. "Here." She stared at the offering like she'd never been handed food before. "Oh no, I couldn't. It's just peanut butter, not a winning lottery ticket," he insisted. "Besides, my daughter Mia always says sharing makes food taste better, even when it's already been flattened by a textbook." Her gaze softened at the mention of his daughter. She took the sandwich, her fingers brushing his for a fraction of a second. The touch was brief, but it sent a strange jolt through him, a flicker of warmth in the cold, sterile night. "Thank you," she said again, her voice barely audible over the hum of the warehouse. They ate in silence for a while, watching the forklifts glide past like mechanical beasts in the dark. "I'm Leo, by the way," he said finally. "Ellie?" she replied, taking a small bite of the sandwich. "So what brings you to the glamorous world of night shift logistics?" She shrugged, looking down at her hands. "Needed a change of scenery, I guess." It was a vague answer, a practiced one, but he didn't push. He understood the need for walls in a place like this. When the horn blared again, signaling the end of their break, they stood up and headed back to their separate worlds. But as Leo walked away, he felt the faint imprint of her gratitude, lingering like a promise that for one night at least, neither of them had been completely alone. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of beeps, boxes, and the relentless hum of the conveyor belts. But something had changed for Leo. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of beeps. Monotony felt a little less suffocating, the air a little less cold. Every so often his eyes would drift across the warehouse floor and find her, Ellie, sweeping quietly in a distant aisle or stacking empty pallets with a focused determination. He noticed the small things, the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the careful way she moved, as if trying to take up as little space as possible. She worked with a quiet efficiency that Mark, the supervisor, couldn't fault. Even though he still watched her with a critical eye, as if waiting for her to make a mistake, she was a puzzle, a ghost with sad eyes, and a story she kept locked away, and for reasons he couldn't explain, Leo found himself wanting to know more. As the first hints of dawn began to paint the sky outside the warehouse windows, Leo felt the familiar ache of exhaustion settling deep in his muscles. He was heading toward the locker room when he saw Ellie struggling with a jammed pallet jack. Its wheels were caught on a metal plate in the floor, and she was pushing against it with all her might, her small frame straining with the effort. Mark stood nearby, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. "Having trouble?" "There, princess," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Maybe this job is a little too much for you." Ellie's cheeks flushed, but she didn't respond. She just kept pushing her jaw tight. Leo's hands clenched into fists. He'd had enough of Mark. For one night, he walked over, and without a word he placed his hand on the jack's handle next to hers. "On 3, he said quietly, his voice a low rumble. She looked up at him, surprised, but nodded. 1, 2, 3. They pushed together and, with a loud groan of metal on metal, the jack lurched free. Mark's smirk faltered, and he mumbled something under his breath. Before walking away defeated, Ellie exhaled a shaky breath and leaned against the handle, her shoulders slumping in. Relief. "Thank you," she said, her eyes meeting his. "You didn't have to do that." "Yeah, I did," he replied, his gaze lingering on her for a moment, longer than necessary. "People like him only have power if you let them." She gave him a small, tired smile. "You're a good person, Leo Ramirez." The way she said his full name surprised him. He hadn't told her his last name. "How did you know?" She pointed to the faded name stitched on his vest. "I pay attention," she said softly as they walked toward the exit together. The rising sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. The world was waking up, and their time as ghosts was over for the day. "I'll see you tonight," Leo said. As they reached their cars, her car, he noticed, was a modest, 10-year-old sedan. Not what he would have expected, but it fit the quiet persona she'd created. "Yeah," she said, her voice a little stronger than before. "See you tonight." And as he drove away, he realized he was already looking forward to it. A feeling he hadn't had about this job ever. The next night, Ellie was there again, sweeping the same floors with the same quiet diligence. But this time, when the brake horn sounded, she walked straight to their corner by the loading dock. Leo was already there, waiting with a thermos of hot soup. He'd made an extra portion that evening, telling himself it was just in case, but he knew it was for her. She smiled when she saw the steam rising from the cup. He handed her a genuine smile that reached her eyes and made them look a little less sad. "You didn't have to do that," she said, taking a careful sip. "It's just soup," he replied, settling onto the pallet beside her. "And you brought the good sandwiches this time." She had 2 turkey and Swiss on wheat bread wrapped neatly in wax paper. She handed him one, and for the second night in a row, they shared a meal in the quiet hum of the warehouse. "So what's your story, Leo?" she asked after a while, her voice soft and curious. "What keeps you coming back to this place?" He hesitated, not used to sharing the details of his life with anyone, let alone a near stranger. But there was something about her, something that made him feel safe. "My daughter Mia," he said, his voice thick with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. "She's 7, and she's the best thing that ever happened to me." He pulled out his phone and showed her a picture. Mia grinning at the camera, a gap in her front teeth and a smear of chocolate on her cheek. Ellie's expression softened as she looked at the photo. "She's beautiful." "She is," he agreed, a small smile playing on his lips. "She had a rough start, though. Born with a heart condition, needed a couple of surgeries. When she was a baby, she's fine now. Healthy as can be, but the bills," he trailed off. Not needing to finish the sentence, she understood. She nodded slowly, her eyes filled with a compassion that felt real, not like the pity he'd grown so used to. "You're a good father," she said quietly. "I'm just trying," he replied, looking down at his hands. "She deserves the world, and I'm just trying to give her a small piece of it." They sat in comfortable silence. After that, the unspoken weight of his story hanging in the air between them. Ellie didn't offer solutions or platitudes, she just listened, and in that moment, that was more than enough. When the break ended, they walked back to the floor together, the distance between them feeling a little smaller than before. As they parted ways, Ellie paused and said, "For what it's worth, Leo, I think you're giving her more than you know." Her words stuck with him for the rest of the night. A small ember of warmth in the cold, repetitive dark. He was starting to realize that this quiet woman with the sad eyes had a kindness that was as rare and as valuable as any treasure he could imagine, and he was grateful to have found it in the most unlikely of places. Her world was a cage of glass and steel, a penthouse apartment on the 54th floor, with panoramic views of a city that never slept. Ilara Vance stood by the floor-to-ceiling window watching the distant headlights of cars move like streams of molten gold. Thousands of feet below it was a view that had once made her feel powerful. Now, it just made her feel isolated. Here she wasn't Ellie, the quiet floor sweeper. She was the sole heir to the Vance corporate empire, a multi-billion-dollar logistics and retail conglomerate. Her grandfather had built from the ground up. She'd inherited it all. Not just the money, but the name, the pressure, the relentless weight of expectation. She slipped out of the simple jeans and worn sweater she'd changed into in her car and into a silk robe that felt like a costume. Her apartment was a monument to minimalist luxury, every surface gleaming, every object placed with architectural precision, but it was a cold, sterile beauty. A home that had been designed, not lived in. On the marble countertop in her kitchen sat a framed photo, not of family or friends, but of her grandfather. A stern-looking man in a tailored suit, a constant reminder of the Clive legacy she was meant to uphold. She poured herself a glass of water, her hands steady, but her mind was miles away in a dusty warehouse break room. She could still taste the salt of the soup. Leo had shared the warmth of the thermos in her cold hands. She thought of the picture of his daughter Mia, the unadulterated joy in her gap-toothed smile. It was a world away from this one, a world where value was measured in love and sacrifice, not stock prices and profit margins. This double life was a risk. She knew that her board of directors would be horrified if they knew. The CEO of Vance Global was spending her nights sweeping floors under an assumed name, but she'd been suffocating in the rarefied air of her own life. She'd needed to feel something real, something that wasn't curated or transactional. She'd chosen the fulfillment center at random, one of dozens. Her company owned a place where she could be anonymous, a ghost among ghosts. What she hadn't expected was Leo. She hadn't expected his quiet dignity, his unsolicited kindness, his unwavering devotion to a little girl she'd never met. He was the first person in years who had treated her like a human being, not a headline or a balance sheet. She walked over to the small cluttered desk in the corner of the vast living room, the one place in the apartment that felt like hers. Tucked beneath a stack of market reports was a small wrinkled piece of paper, a pay stub from the warehouse, her first one. It read, Ellie Jones hourly rate, 16.5. She traced her fake name with her finger, a small sad smile on her lips. For $16.50 an hour, she got to be someone else for a little while. She got to feel seen, and for a billionaire who had everything, that was a bargain. She couldn't afford to lose a week, turned into 2, and the rhythm of their shared breaks became a quiet ritual, a small anchor in the long dark nights. Leo would bring an extra portion of whatever he'd cooked for dinner, and Ellie would bring something she'd picked up from a small bakery near her other apartment, a place she'd discovered on one of her aimless drives. They talked about small things, Mia's upcoming school play, the best way to fix a leaky faucet, the strange characters they encountered in the warehouse. They never talked about her past or his future. They existed in a bubble of the present, a fragile pocket of time where their two vastly different worlds didn't have to collide. One night, Leo seemed more tired than usual. His movements were slower, his eyes heavier. He barely touched the food Ellie had brought him. "You okay?" she asked. Her voice, laced with a concern that surprised even herself, ran a hand over his face, exhaling a long, weary sigh. "It's Mia's birthday next week," he said. "She'll be 8. She's been talking about this one thing for months. A starlight projector, a little gadget that fills her room with stars and galaxies." His voice was tinged with a familiar frustration. It's not even that expensive, but with the rent increase this month and the car needing new brakes, it might as well be a trip to the moon." He looked away his pride, a palpable thing in the air between them. "I just want to give her one thing she really wants, just one perfect thing." Ellie listened, her heart aching for him. She knew she could buy 1,000 Starlight projectors without even noticing the expense. She could buy the entire toy store and have it delivered to his doorstep. But that wasn't what he needed. He needed dignity. He needed to be the one to give his daughter the stars. She didn't offer money. She didn't offer solutions. She just reached out and placed a hand on his arm. Her touch was light, but steady. "You'll figure it out, Leo," she said softly. "You always do." He looked at her, a grateful smile touching his lips. "Thanks, Ellie." Later that night, back in the sterile silence of her penthouse, Alara opened her laptop. She didn't look at stock reports or sales projections. She typed, "Starlight projector for kids," into the search bar. Images of glowing galaxies and happy children filled the Sark Portidel screen she found. The one, he was talking about a small orb that promised to turn any ceiling into a celestial wonderland. She added it to her cart, then paused, her finger hovering over the Buy Now button. This felt wrong, too easy a betrayal of the quiet trust they had built. She closed the laptop, a new idea forming in her mind. She couldn't buy him the stars, but maybe, just maybe, she could help him earn them the next day. Alara walked into the office of her chief operating officer, a man named Arthur, who had worked for her grandfather for 30 years and was one of the few people who knew about her other life. He looked up from his desk, his expression a mixture of exasperation and affection. "Don't tell me you've been sorting packages again," he said dryly. She gave him a small smile. "I need you to do something for me, Arthur, and it needs to be quiet," she explained her plan, her voice low and steady. He listened patiently, his brow furrowed in thought. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "You want me to create a temporary special project at the warehouse. A project that requires overtime and pays a bonus. And you want to make sure a specific employee is chosen for it." "He's a good worker," she said defensively. "He deserves it." Arthur sighed. "Alara, this is a dangerous game you're playing. What happens when he finds out who you are?" "He won't," she said a little too quickly. "And this isn't a game, Arthur, it's—" She trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence. "Kind, fair, right?" He studied her for a long moment, his eyes seeing more than she wanted them to. "All right," he said finally. "I'll make the arrangements, but be careful, my dear. Some lines, once they're crossed, can't be uncrossed." She nodded, a knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. She knew he was right. She was wading into deeper water than she'd ever intended. But the thought of Leo's tired face and the quiet desperation in his voice when he talked about his daughter's birthday pushed her forward. She was the woman who owned the company that was slowly breaking him. She owed him this. A chance to catch his breath. A chance to give his daughter the stars himself, even if he never knew who had aligned them for him. Leo was surprised when Mark, the supervisor, approached him at the start of his shift, a rare occurrence that usually meant bad news. But this time, Mark's tone was different, almost respectful. "Ramirez," he said, holding out a clipboard, "management just approved a priority shipment that needs to be sorted and repacked by Friday. It's a rush job, requires careful handling. Pays time and a half, plus a completion bonus. You're the most reliable scanner we've got on nights you want it." Leo blinked, stunned. Overtime. And a bonus, the word sounded foreign. A lifeline he hadn't dared to hope for. He thought of the Starlight projector, of the new brakes for his car, of the relief of not having to choose between rent and a birthday gift. "Yeah," he said, his voice a little rough. "I'll take it." The next few nights were a blur of exhausting work. Leo stayed late, his body aching, but his spirit buoyed by a sense of purpose. He moved with a renewed energy, His scans were faster, his focus sharper. He was going to make this happen for Mia Ellie. Watched him from a distance, a mixture of pride and guilt swirling inside her. She saw the hope back in his eyes, the way he walked. A little taller despite his exhaustion, she knew she had done the right thing, but the secret felt heavier with each passing day on their breaks. He would talk excitedly about his plans for Mia's birthday, how he was going to surprise her with the projector and a homemade cake with extra sprinkles. "You're a good friend, Ellie," he said one night as they shared a container of leftover pasta. "You listen, you know." She just smiled, her heart clenching. "You're a good man, Leo." The night he finished the project, he was bone tired, but triumphant. He collected his bonus, in cash, from the office. A crisp envelope that felt like a miracle in his hands. He walked out into the cool morning air, feeling lighter than he had in months. He saw Ellie by her car waiting for him. "You did it," she said, her smile genuine and warm. "Yeah," he said, holding up the envelope. "I did it." He wanted to thank her for her encouragement, for just being there, but the words got stuck in his throat. Instead, he just looked at her, the rising sun casting a golden glow around her, and felt a surge of gratitude. So profound, it almost knocked him off his feet. He didn't know it yet, but the stars he was about to buy for his daughter had been put within his reach by the quiet woman standing in front of him, a woman who was becoming more important to him than he was ready to admit. The toy store was a small wonderland tucked between a laundromat and a pizza place. Its windows were filled with brightly colored kites and stuffed animals that seemed to wave at passers-by. Leo walked in with Mia's hand in his, the bell above the door chiming cheerfully. Mia's eyes went wide as she took in the shelves, stacked high with games, puzzles, and dolls, her breath caught in a small gasp of delight. It had been a long time since they'd been in a place like this, a place of pure, unfiltered joy. Leo's heart swelled as he watched her. She deserved this. She deserved to feel like the world was a magical place full of possibilities. He led her to the back of the store, where a small display of science-themed toys was set up, and there it was, the starlight projector sitting in its box adorned with swirling galaxies and colorful nebulas. Mia's face lit up like the 4th of July. "Daddy, it's the one," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. He knelt beside her, his own smile mirroring hers. "I know, sweetheart. Happy birthday." He paid for it with the cash from his bonus, the crisp bills feeling like more than just money. They were a testament to his hard work, his sacrifice, his love for his daughter. As they left the store, Mia clutched the box to her chest like it was the most precious treasure in the world. "This is the best birthday ever," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears of joy. That night they set it up in her room. They plugged it in, turned off the lights, and watched as a breathtaking universe exploded across her ceiling. Shimmering stars spiraled slowly. A soft blue nebula drifted past a crescent moon, and a distant Milky Way painted a swath of light from one wall to the other. Mia lay on her bed, her hands folded on her chest, staring up at the cosmos with a look of pure wonder. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Leo lay beside her, his arm around her, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. He had done it. He had given her the stars. He thought of Ellie, of their quiet conversations in the dead of night, of her steady, unwavering belief in him. He wouldn't have been able to do this without her encouragement, without that unexpected overtime that had felt like a gift from the universe. He made a mental note to thank her properly when he saw her next, to tell her what a difference she had made, as Mia drifted off to sleep under a canopy of swirling galaxies. Leo felt a sense of peace settle over him. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't just surviving, he was living, and in the quiet darkness of his daughter's room, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope for the future, a bland hate future that might just include a quiet woman with sad eyes and a kind heart who had somehow managed to bring a little bit of starlight into his own life. Ilara sat in the sterile white boardroom, the silence punctuated only by the soft click of her pen against the polished mahogany table. The faces around her were a familiar gallery of corporate ambition, her company's board of directors, men and women who measured success in quarterly earnings and market share. They were discussing a new multi-million-dollar automation initiative for their fulfillment centers, a plan that promised to increase efficiency by 18% and reduce labor costs significantly. The projections are solid. Arthur, her COO, was saying, his voice a calm monotone as he pointed to a chart on the screen. The initial investment will be substantial, but the long-term ROI is undeniable. Ilara stared at the chart, the numbers and graphs blurring into a meaningless jumble. They wasn't thinking about ROI. She was thinking about Leo, about the weariness in his eyes, the calluses on his hands, the quiet dignity with which he worked to provide for his daughter. She thought of the hundreds of other Leos on her payroll, the ghosts in the high-visibility vests whose lives would be upended by this new technology. "What about the people, Arthur?" she asked. Her voice cutting through the clinical discussion. The room went quiet. All eyes turned to her. "What about the employees whose jobs will be made redundant by these machines?" A board member, a slick man named Peterson, cleared his throat. "Ilara, with all due respect, this is a business decision, not a philanthropic one. Our primary responsibility is to our shareholders." "Is it?" she countered, her voice dangerously soft. "Or is our primary responsibility to the human beings who have built this company with their own two hands, the ones who show up in the middle of the person's night to pack the boxes that make our profits possible?" The tension in the room was thick enough to taste. Peterson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Of course we value our employees, but progress requires change. Progress shouldn't be built on the backs of the people who can least afford it," she said, standing up, her voice ringing with a conviction that startled even herself. She looked around the table at the surprised faces of the men and women who had known her as a quiet, compliant leader. "We're not moving forward with this initiative, not until we have a plan in place to retrain and reassign every single employee who will be affected. We will invest in our people, not just our machines." There was a stunned silence then. Arthur, a slow smile spreading across his face, nodded his approval. "I think that's an excellent idea, Ms. Vance." Ilara sat back down, her heart pounding. She had just challenged the very foundation of her company's ethos, the Koningslesses en Herigid de blank, cold, ruthless pursuit of profit above all else. She had spoken, not as a CEO, but as Ellie, the quiet floor sweeper who had shared a sandwich with a good man in the middle of the night. She didn't know what the consequences would be, but for the first time in a long time she felt like she was in the right place, doing the right thing. She had found her voice, and it sounded a lot like Leo's quiet strength. The warehouse buzzed with a nervous energy. The next night, rumors were flying about a big announcement from corporate. Some said there would be layoffs. Others whispered about a new round of automation that would replace half the night shift. Leo tried to ignore the chatter, focusing on his work, but a knot of anxiety had tightened. In his stomach, he couldn't afford to lose this job. Not now. When he was finally starting to get back on his feet, he found Ellie during their break, sitting in their usual spot by the loading dock. She looked pensive, her eyes distant. "You heard the rumors?" he asked, sitting beside her. She nodded, her gaze fixed on the concrete floor. "I'm sure it's nothing," she said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the unspoken fear hanging between them like a heavy curtain. Leo thought of Mia, of the starlight projector, now a permanent fixture in her room, of the fragile sense of hope. He had just started to feel, he couldn't go back to that constant state of worry, that suffocating feeling of being one step away from disaster. "If something happens," he began, not sure how to finish the sentence. "We'll figure it out." "Ellie," said her voice firm. She turned to him. her eyes meeting his with a surprising intensity. "You're a survivor, Leo. You've been through worse than this." Her words were a balm to his frayed nerves. He didn't know why, but he believed her. Her quiet confidence was contagious. A small, steady flame in the face of uncertainty. Later that night, the official announcement came an email sent to every employee's device. Leo read it once, then twice, his breath catching in his throat. It wasn't about layoffs or automation. It was about investment, a new company-wide initiative to provide educational grants and skills training programs for all hourly employees, a pathway to higher-paying jobs within the company, a chance for a future beyond the warehouse. Floor at the bottom of the email was a quote attributed to the CEO Ilara Vance. "Our people are our greatest asset, and it's time our investments reflected that." Leo stared at the words stunned. It was the lifeline he hadn't even dared to pray for. He looked across the aisle and saw Ellie, leaning against a stack of pallets, a small secret smile on her face. She caught his eye and gave him a subtle nod, as if to say, "I told you so." He walked over to her, a grin spreading across his face. "Can you believe it?" he said. His voice filled with a relief so profound it made him feel lightheaded. She smiled back. "I can," she said softly. "Sometimes the people at the top get it right." He laughed. Sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "Yeah," he said. "I guess they do." He wanted to hug her, to lift her off the ground and spin her around, but he held back. Instead, he just stood there, basking in the warmth of her smile, feeling like for the first time the universe was finally on his side. He didn't know that the universe had a name, and she was standing right in front of him. Their friendship deepened in the weeks that followed, a quiet, comfortable bond forged in the shared solitude of the night shift. They fell into an easy rhythm of shared meals and quiet conversations. Leo started the application process for an IT training program offered through the new company initiative, a path he'd only dreamed of before Ellie helped him with his application essay. Staying late after their shift, to help him find the right words to articulate his hopes for the future. "You're good at this," he said one morning, as they sat in the empty break room, the first rays of dawn painting the windows. "You should be a teacher or something." She just smiled and shook her head. "I'm just a good listener." One night, he brought Mia to the warehouse for a few minutes to pick him up. Mrs. Gable had a last-minute appointment, and he had no other choice. He met her at the employee entrance, his heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and pride. Mia was bundled in her favorite pink coat, clutching Bartholomew the rabbit to her chest. Her eyes were wide as she peered into the wide, cavernous space of the warehouse. "It's so big," she whispered. Ellie was sweeping nearby, and she paused when she saw them, a soft smile touching her lips. "This must be Mia," she said, her voice gentle. Leo nodded. "Mia, this is my friend Ellie." Mia looked up at Ellie, her gaze direct and curious. Then she held out her stuffed rabbit. "This is Bartholomew. He's very brave." Ellie knelt to be at Mia's level, her eyes sparkling. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Bartholomew," she said with a seriousness that made Mia giggle. Mia then reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a crayon, drawing of a smiling stick figure, holding hands with a smaller stick figure under a sky full of scribbled stars. "This is for you," she said, handing it to Ellie. "It's me and my daddy and our new stars. You helped him get them for me." Ellie's breath hitched as she took the drawing. She stared at the simple, heartfelt gift, her eyes welling with tears. She had conference rooms filled with awards and plaques, testimonies to her business acumen, but this small, crumpled piece of paper felt like the most valuable thing she had ever held. She looked from the drawing to Leo, his face a mixture of pride and embarrassment. "Thank you, Mia," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," as Leo walked Mia back to the car. She whispered, "I like her, Daddy. She has kind eyes." Leo smiled. "Yeah, kiddo, she does." He glanced back and saw Ellie still standing there, holding the drawing to her chest like a precious secret, and he felt something shift inside him, a plast feeling he hadn't allowed himself to have in a very long time. It wasn't just friendship anymore. It was something more, something deeper, something that both thrilled and terrified him, because he was starting to fall for the quiet woman who swept floors, and he had no idea she owned the ground. He was standing on the article. Appeared on a Tuesday, a glossy feature in a high-profile business magazine that was delivered to every major corporation in the country. The Y-com headline was bold and declarative. The Quiet Lioness. Ilara Vance's radical reinvention of a corporate empire. The cover photo was a masterpiece of corporate portraiture. Ilara seated in a leather chair in her penthouse office, the city skyline sprawling behind her like a conquered kingdom. She looked powerful, poised, and completely in control. A world away from the quiet, unassuming woman who shared sandwiches. In a warehouse break room, Arthur, her COO, placed the magazine on her desk with a heavy sigh. "It's a flattering piece," he said. "They're calling your new employee initiatives revolutionary, visionary." Ilara stared at her own face on the cover. A stranger in a silk blouse. She felt a wave of nausea. She hadn't sought this publicity. The journalist had been persistent. And her PR team had insisted it was a necessary part of rebranding the company's image. Now, her two worlds were on a collision course, and she felt utterly powerless to stop it that night. At the warehouse, the magazine was the talk of the PR break room. A copy had been left on one of the tables, and the workers were passing it around, their voices, a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Can you believe our CEO is that young?" one of them said. "She looks like a movie star," another added. "I heard she's a genius, took over the company and turned it around in a year." Leo glanced at the cover, his eyes scanning the photo of the powerful woman with the familiar name, Ilara Vance. He felt a strange sense of detachment. This was the person who had unknowingly changed his life, the architect of his newfound hope. He felt a flicker of gratitude, but she was a distant figure, a concept. Not a person. He didn't connect her to his world at all. Ellie was quiet that night. Quieter than usual. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact. When the brake horn sounded, she didn't go to their usual spot. Leo found her in a deserted aisle by the shipping supplies. Her shoulders hunched, her face pale. "Hey," he said, softly. "You, okay? You seem off tonight." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a turmoil he couldn't decipher. "Just a long day," she said. Her voice strained. He sat beside her on a stack of flattened boxes. "You saw the magazine?" he asked. She nodded, a knot tightening in her stomach. "Crazy, right?" he said, shaking his head. "To think that woman is the one making all these decisions, changing all our lives from some fancy office in the sky," he chuckled. "I bet she has no idea what it's really like down here." Every word was a dagger in Ilara's heart. He was right. She had been a tourist in his reality, a voyeur in her own company. She had wanted to understand, but she had done it from a place of privilege, place of safety. She had built a friendship on a foundation of lies, and now the truth was a ticking time bomb. She wanted to tell him everything, to confess who she was and why she was there. But the words wouldn't come. She was a coward, paralyzed by the fear of losing the one real thing she had found in a lifetime of artifice. "Yeah," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I bet she doesn't." Leo sensed her distress but misinterpreted it as sadness for her own humble circumstances. He reached out and gently squeezed her shoulder. "Hey, don't worry about all that stuff. We've got our own world right here," he said, his voice warm and reassuring. His kindness was her undoing. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, hoping he wouldn't notice, but he did. His smile faded, replaced by a look of concern. "Ellie, what's wrong?" Before she could answer, the end of brake horn blared a welcome reprieve. She stood up quickly, her back to him. "It's nothing," she said, her voice choked. "I'm just tired." She walked away, leaving Leo standing there, his heart filled with a confusion and a worry that would follow him for the rest of the plog. Night, he was falling for a woman of secrets, and he was starting to realize that those secrets might be big enough to break them both. The breaking point came on a Friday night. It was a slow shift, the warehouse humming at a lower frequency than usual, a calm before a storm. Leo hadn't anticipated. Mark, the supervisor, had been riding everyone harder than usual, his temper frayed by some new pressure from upper management. He'd been particularly hard on Ellie, nitpicking her work and making snide comments. Under his breath, Leo had been biting his tongue all night, his protective instincts on high. Alert around 4 a.m. A sleek black town car pulled up to the loading bay. An unusual sight at this hour, two men in tailored suits stepped out, their polished shoes looking absurdly out of place on the dusty concrete floor. One of them was Arthur Ilara's COO. The other was Peterson, the board member who had challenged her in the meeting. They were doing a surprise late-night inspection, a power play to see if Ilara's new initiatives were just for show. Mark rushed over to greet them, his usual bluster replaced by a fawning deference. "Gentlemen, welcome. What an unexpected pleasure," he said, his voice oozing with sycophancy. Arthur's gaze swept across the warehouse floor, his eyes sharp and assessing. He ignored Mark completely, his focus landing on the quiet woman sweeping near the packing stations. "There you are," he said, his voice echoing in the relative silence of the warehouse. Ellie froze her back to them, the broom falling from her hands with a soft clatter. She slowly turned, her face pale, her eyes wide with a trapped animal panic. Leo, who had been watching from a nearby aisle, felt a cold dread creep up his spine. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew it was something significant, something that was about to change everything. Peterson's eyes widened in disbelief as he recognized the woman in the janitor's vest. "Miss Vance." He sputtered, his voice a mixture of shock and outrage. "What in God's name are you doing here?" The name hung in the air like a death knell. Miss Vance, Ilara Vance, the CEO, the woman from the magazine. Leo's world tilted on its axis. He stared at Ellie, at Ilara, his mind struggling to connect the two disparate images, the quiet, unassuming woman who shared his sandwiches and the powerful billionaire on the cover of a magazine. It was impossible. It was a joke. It was a nightmare. He looked at her face, her beautiful, terrified face, and saw the truth in her eyes. She had been lying to him. All along, the friendship, the connection, the trust it had, all been a lie. Mark's jaw dropped, his face a comical mask of horror. He looked from the powerful woman in the vest to Leo, who she'd been spending all her breaks with, and a slow, dawning realization of his own foolishness spread across his features. Leo didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His silence was a roaring accusation. He turned and walked away, his heart a block of ice in his chest. He felt the eyes of the entire night shift on him, the whispers starting to ripple through the warehouse. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He just kept walking away from the woman he thought he knew, away from the lie that had shattered his world into a million unrecognizable pieces. He went straight to his locker, his hands shaking so violently he could barely work the combination. He grabbed his jacket and his backpack and walked out of the warehouse without clocking out. He didn't care about the job anymore. He didn't care about anything except the gaping wound in his chest. He drove home on autopilot, the city lights blurring through his tear-filled eyes. He thought of all their conversations, all the moments of shared vulnerability, all the time she had looked at him with what he thought was genuine affection. Had it all been an act, a game, a social experiment for a bored billionaire to see how the other half lived? The thought was a venom that spread through his veins, making him sick with a mixture of anger and humiliation. He parked his car and sat in the silence of his own driveway. For a long time the sun was starting to rise, but he felt like he was still trapped in the darkest. Part of the night, he finally went inside. The apartment was quiet. Mia was still asleep. He stood in the doorway of her room, watching her chest rise and fall in a steady rhythm. She was his reality, his anchor, his reason for everything, and he had almost let a stranger, a liar, into their small, fragile world. He felt a surge of protective anger, so fierce it almost choked him. He had been a fool, a trusting fool, and he would never make that mistake again. He went into the kitchen and saw the crayon drawing Mia had given to Alara. Taped to his fridge, he had put it there himself, a proud reminder of his daughter's kindness. Now it felt like a monument to his own stupidity. He ripped it off the fridge, crumpled it into a tight ball, and threw it in the trash. He then sat down at the kitchen table and buried his face in his hands. The silence of the apartment pressing in on him from all sides. He had lost more than a friend. He had lost a hope he hadn't even realized he was holding on to so tightly. And the pain of it was a physical thing, a hollow ache that he knew would be with him for a long, long time. The phone started ringing at dawn. Alara didn't answer. She sat on the floor of her cavernous living room, still in her warehouse uniform. The city, waking up in a blaze of gold and pink outside her window, she stared at the phone as Leo's name flashed on the screen again and again, a silent testament to the wreckage she had caused. She had tried to call him the moment she got home, but it went straight to voicemail. She had sent him a barrage of texts, frantic apologies, desperate pleas to let her explain, but they all remained unread. She knew it was useless. He wouldn't listen. Not now. He felt betrayed. And he had. Every right to Arthur had driven her home in a tense silence. His disapproval, a palpable presence in the car. "I warned you, Alara," he had said, his voice heavy with a disappointed affection. "Some things can't be undone," she had just nodded. That her throat too tight to speak. She had wanted to feel real, to connect with someone on a human level, but she had done it through deception, a lie of omission that was just as damaging as an outright falsehood. She had been so afraid of her name, her wealth, her power, that she had hidden behind a mask, and in doing so, she had become the very thing she despised, a person who manipulated others for her own needs, even if those needs were as simple as a moment of genuine connection. She looked at the crumpled drawing Mia had given her, which she had rescued from her locker before she left. It was a child's simple offering, a pure and honest expression of gratitude, and she had betrayed that too. She had taken their kindness, their trust, their friendship, and shattered it with the weight of her own secrets. She was a coward, a fraud, a billionaire, who had everything and nothing. At the same time, she finally stood up and walked to the window. The city sprawled below her, a glittering testament to her family's legacy, but she felt no pride, no sense of belonging. She was a stranger in her own life, an architect of her own isolation. She had flown too close to a small, steady flame, and now she was left with nothing but the ashes of what might have been. She knew she had to fix this, but for the first time in her life, she had no idea how money couldn't mend a broken heart. A corporate strategy couldn't restore trust. All she had was the truth, and she was terrified it wouldn't be enough. Leo didn't go back to the warehouse. He called in and quit, citing personal reasons. He didn't offer any other explanation, and they didn't ask. He spent the next few days in a fog of anger and grief. He threw himself into his handyman work, taking on every job he could find, patching drywall, fixing leaky pipes, painting fences, anything to keep his hands busy and his mind from wandering to the place he didn't want to go. But the nights were the hardest. The silence of his small apartment was a constant reminder of the quiet conversations he had once looked forward to. He would find himself making an extra portion of dinner out of habit, only to stare at it with a hollow ache in his chest. Mia was the one who suffered the most in the silence. She didn't understand what had happened. only that her father was sadder, quieter than she had ever seen him, and that his friend Ellie had disappeared. "Is Ellie coming over again?" she would ask, her voice small and hopeful. And each time Leo would have to shake his head, his heart breaking a little more. "I don't think so, sweetheart." One evening while he was tucking her into bed, she looked up at him with her wide, perceptive eyes. "Did you have a fight?" she asked. Leo sat on the edge of her bed, his shoulders slumping. "Something like that," he said, his voice rough. "It's complicated. Mommy used to—" "Say that complicated is just another word for scared," Mia said quietly. Her words a sharp, unexpected blow. Leo stared at her, stunned by her simple, profound wisdom. She was right. He was scared. He was terrified of being hurt again, of letting someone into their fragile world, only to have them leave. He had built walls around his heart after his wife died. Thick, impenetrable walls. And Alara had somehow managed to find a crack in them. He had let her in, and she had proven that his fears were justified. But as he looked at his daughter's sad, disappointed face, he realized that his walls weren't just protecting him, they were also imprisoning them both, in a world of loneliness and mistrust. He had been so focused on the betrayal that he hadn't considered the why. He hadn't allowed himself to think about the fear and desperation he had seen in her eyes. In that final moment, he had judged her without hearing her side of the story, and that wasn't fair. It wasn't who he wanted to be. He kissed Mia's forehead and tucked her in tight. "You're a smart kid, you know that," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She smiled a small, sleepy smile. "I know." As he walked out of her room, he felt a small shift inside him. The anger was still there, but it was tempered by a new feeling, a flicker of something that felt dangerously like empathy. He wasn't ready to forgive her, not yet, but he was starting to wonder if, maybe, just maybe, he had been a part of the complication too. The package arrived. A week later, delivered by a courier to his doorstep. It was a simple brown box with no return address, just his name, and address printed in neat block letters. He opened it cautiously, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and curiosity. Inside was a brand new high-end toolkit, the kind he had only ever dreamed of owning. Every wrench, every screwdriver, every socket was made of gleaming chrome, vanadium, steel, nestled in a custom-molded case. It was a professional set, a handyman's fantasy, a gift that was worth more than his car. Tucked inside the lid was a simple handwritten note. No frills, no fancy stationery, just a few words on a plain white card. "I know you won't accept money, so please accept this. You're a builder, Leo. You fix things that are broken. I hope one day you can forgive me for being one of them." It was signed simply, Alara. His first instinct was to slam the box shut, to send it back, to throw it away. It was a charity case. A rich woman's attempt to assuage her guilt with an expensive gift, but as he ran his hand over the cool, smooth surface of the tools, he hesitated. This wasn't just a gift, it was an apology, an acknowledgement, a quiet testament to the fact that she had listened to him, that she had seen him. She remembered him talking about his old, worn-out tools, about how he dreamed of having a set like this. One day she had paid attention to the small details of his life, the things that mattered to him. This wasn't a transaction, it was a message. He thought of Mia's words. Complicated is just another word for scared. He had been scared, and so had she. They had both been hiding behind their own walls. His of pride and grief, hers of wealth and fear. He looked at the tools again and saw them not as a handout, but as a bridge, a fragile, tentative offering across the chasm that separated their two worlds. He didn't know if he could cross it. He didn't know if he wanted to, but for the first time since that night in the warehouse, he felt the ice around his heart begin to thaw. He closed the lid of the toolbox, but he didn't send it back. He carried it into his small workshop in the back of the apartment and set it on his workbench. A silent symbol of a complicated story that wasn't over yet, he decided to write her a letter. Not of forgiveness, but of acknowledgement. A simple thank you for the tools. A quiet recognition of her gesture. He didn't have her address, so he sent it to the corporate headquarters of Vance Global, addressed to Ilara Vance, CEO. He didn't know if she would ever get it, but the act of writing it was a step, a small movement toward a future. He couldn't yet imagine the letter arrived on Ilara's desk. A week later, a simple white envelope in a sea of corporate correspondence. Her assistant had placed it on top of a stack of urgent reports. But it was the first thing. She saw. Her heart leaped into her throat as she recognized Leo's handwriting on the front. She opened it with trembling fingers, her breath catching as she read the few simple lines inside. Thank you for the tools. They're too nice for a guy like me, but I'll do my best to live up to them. You were right, I do fix things that are broken, I'm just not sure if we are one of them. Leo, it wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't an invitation, but it was a door. Left ajar, a sliver of light in the darkness of her own making. She read the letter over and over again, the words a balm to her bruised soul. He had heard her, he had understood, and he hadn't completely shut her out. That was more than she had dared to hope, for she knew what she had to do. She couldn't hide behind gifts and letters anymore. She had to face him, to talk to him, to be vulnerable in a way she had never been before. She had to show him that she wasn't just a name on a magazine cover or a ghost in a warehouse. She was just a woman, a flawed, complicated woman who had fallen in love with a man who saw the best in her even when she couldn't see it in herself. She booked a flight that afternoon, not on the corporate jet, but on a commercial airline in a coach seat. She didn't tell Arthur where she was going. She didn't tell anyone. She just packed a small bag with simple clothes and the crumpled crayon drawing Mia had given her a talisman of hope in a journey of uncertainty. She was done being scared. She was ready to be complicated. She was ready to fight for the one thing in her life that had ever felt real. She found him in the place she should have. He looked first. A small community park on the east side of town. A place he had told her about once, where he took Mia on Saturdays to fly kites and eat ice cream. He was sitting on a bench by the duck pond, watching Mia toss breadcrumbs to a flock of eager birds. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over the scene, a perfect picture of the life she had so carelessly disrupted. She approached him slowly, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He saw her coming, his body tensing, his expression a mixture of surprise and apprehension. Mia saw her too, and her face lit up with a pure, unadulterated joy that almost brought Ilara to her knees. "Ellie!" she cried, dropping her bread and running toward her. Ilara knelt and caught her in a fierce hug, burying her face in Mia's soft hair. "I missed you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I missed you too," Mia said, pulling back and looking at her with serious eyes. "Are you here to stay this time?" Ilara looked over Mia's head at Leo, who was now standing by the bench, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. "That's what I came to find out," she said. Her gaze locked on his. She stood up and walked toward him, leaving Mia to happily return to her ducks. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with weeks of hurt and misunderstanding. "You came," he said, his voice low and cautious. "I had to," she replied, her own voice trembling slightly. "I couldn't leave it like that, Leo." They stood in silence for a long moment, the sounds of the park fading into the background. "The tools were too much," he said finally. "It was all I could think of," she whispered. "It was the only language I knew how to speak." "I don't need your money, Ilara," he said, his voice tinged with the old familiar pride. "I know," she said, taking a step closer. "That's not why I'm here. I'm here because I was a coward. I was so afraid of you seeing me for who I really was, that I hid, and I hurt you, and I'm so sorry." Her voice broke on the last word, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking you to let me try to earn it." He looked at her, at the genuine remorse in her eyes, at the vulnerability she was so bravely showing him. And he saw not the billionaire CEO, but the woman he had shared his sandwiches with, the woman who had listened to his stories and believed in his dreams. He saw Ellie, and he realized that he had missed her more than he had been willing to admit. "What if we're too different?" he asked, his voice a quiet murmur. "What if this is just a recipe for disaster?" "What if it's not?" she countered, her voice gaining strength. "What if we're just two people who found each other in the middle of the night, and maybe, just maybe, we're better together than we are apart?" She reached out and took his hand, her touch sending a familiar jolt of warmth through him. "I'm not perfect, Leo," she said. "I'm complicated, and I'm scared. But I'm also tired of being alone. And I think maybe you are too." He looked at their joined hands, at the contrast between his calloused fingers and her smooth ones, and he knew she was right. He was tired of being alone. He was tired of being scared. He was tired of living a life that was safe but empty. He looked at Mia laughing by the pond, and then back at the woman standing in front of him, her eyes full of a hope that mirrored his own, and he made a decision. "Okay," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Okay." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a solution. But that was a start. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like an invitation, a quiet, hopeful invitation to build something new, something real, something together. They started slowly, tentatively, like two people learning to walk again after a long illness. There were no grand gestures, no public declarations, just small, quiet moments of connection. Coffee on his porch swing while Mia did her homework. Walks in the park where they talked about everything and nothing. Dinners at his small kitchen table where Alara learned to cook simple meals. Her initial attempts often ending in laughter and burnt toast. She never came in her fancy cars or her designer clothes. She came as Ellie in jeans and a simple sweater, the woman he had first met. She kept her two worlds separate for a time, not out of deception but out of respect for the fragile trust they were rebuilding. She told him about her grandfather, about the pressure of her legacy, about the loneliness of a life lived in the public eye. He told her about his wife, about the grief that had shaped him, about his fears for Mia's future. They were two people from different universes, but they found common ground in their shared humanity, their shared desire for a life of meaning and connection. One afternoon, as they were working in his small garden, planting tomatoes and herbs, Mia came running out with a scrapbook she had made. It was filled with her crayon drawings, a visual history of their last few months. There were pictures of the warehouse, the starlight projector, the park, the duck pond, and on the last page was a new drawing, the three of them holding hands in front of Leo's small house under a smiling sun. "It's our family," Mia said proudly. Ilara's eyes filled with tears as she hugged the little girl tight. She looked at Leo over Mia's head, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. He smiled at her, a slow, warm smile that reached his eyes and crinkled the corners in that way she loved. "What do you think?" he asked softly. "Should we make it official?" She didn't need to answer her tears, and her radiant smile said it all. The wedding was a small affair, held in the backyard of Leo's house, surrounded by the tomato plants they had planted together. Mia was the flower girl, her basket filled with petals from their own garden. She wore a simple white dress and a crown of daisies in her hair. Ilara wore a simple linen dress, no designer label, no diamonds, just a string of pearls, that had belonged to her grandmother. Leo wore his best suit, a little worn but clean and pressed. He looked at his bride, her face glowing with a happiness he had never seen before, and he knew he had made the right choice. They exchanged vows, they had written themselves promises of love, honesty, and a lifetime of shared sunrises and burnt toast. Arthur was there, his face beaming with a fatherly pride. He had flown in for the calmest occasion, The only guest from Elara's other world, he raised a glass of champagne in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, "and to the quiet lioness who finally found her roar." After the ceremony, they danced on the Welfen the Bravendanis grass to the sound of a small string quartet Elara had hired as a surprise. Leo held her close, his heart filled with a gratitude so profound it left him breathless. "I love you," he whispered in her ear. "I love you too," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for seeing me." As the sun set, they sat on the porch swing with Mia nestled between them, watching the fireflies begin to dance in the twilight. Elara leaned her head on Leo's shoulder, her hand resting in his, a quiet sense of peace settling over them. They had built a bridge between their two worlds, a bridge made of trust, love, and the shared belief that the most valuable things in life are not the ones you can buy, but the ones you build with your own two hands. Had a long road ahead of them, a future full of challenges and complications, but they would face it together as a family, a small, unlikely family, born in the heart of a warehouse. In the dead of night they had found their starlight, not in the Prade sky, but in each other. And it was more beautiful than they could have ever imagined. The morning after the wedding, the world felt new-washed, clean, and shimmering. With possibility, Leo woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of soft laughter coming from the kitchen. He found Elara and Mia at the table. Mia in her pajamas, and Elara in one of his old t-shirts that was far too big for her. They were making pancakes, their faces dusted with flour. Elara looked up when he entered, her face radiant with a joy that was still new and breathtaking. "Good morning, husband," she said, her voice warm and playful. He smiled and kissed her, a long, slow kiss that tasted of coffee and maple syrup. "Good morning, wife," he replied, his heart swelling with a love so fierce it almost hurt. Later that day, a sleek black car pulled up to the house. A courier stepped out and handed Elara a thick envelope. She opened it and pulled out a set of blueprints. She unrolled them on the kitchen table, her eyes shining with excitement. "What's this?" Leo asked, peering over her shoulder. "It's our future," she said, tracing the lines of the drawing with her finger. It was a plan for a new community center, a place that would offer free job training, childcare, and educational resources for low-income families in their neighborhood. "I'm funding it through a new foundation I've established," she explained. "A foundation dedicated to investing in people. Not just profits, and I want you to run it." "Leo," he stared at her, stunned. "Me, but I'm just a handyman." "You're a builder," she corrected him gently. "You fix things, you help people, you see the good in everyone. You're the most qualified person." "I know." He was speechless, his mind reeling with the possibilities. He looked at the blueprints, at the hopeful future they represented, and then at the woman standing beside him, the woman who believed in him more than he believed in himself. "What about your company?" he asked. "What about Vance Global?" She smiled and took his hand. "I'm not leaving it. I'm changing it from the inside out, and I can't do it alone. I need you by my side, Leo, not as my employee, but as my partner in everything." And in that moment, he knew that their love story wasn't just about two people finding each other. It was about two worlds colliding and creating something new, something better, something that had the power to change not just their own lives, but the lives of countless others. They were a team, a force for good, a testament to the fact that love, when it is true and selfless, has the power to move mountains and build futures more beautiful than any starlight projector could ever hope to illuminate. Their life together was a beautiful tapestry woven from the threads of their two different worlds. There were quiet evenings on the porch swing and black-tie charity galas, where Leo, in a well-tailored suit, looked just as comfortable as he did in his work boots. There were board meetings where Elara challenged the old guard with her new vision for a more compassionate capitalism, and there were parent-teacher conferences where she and Leo sat side by side, listening to Mia's teacher praise her kindness and her creativity, they built the community center together, from the ground up. Leo, overseeing the construction with his practical know-how, and Alara, managing the logistics and the funding with her business acumen, it became a beacon of hope in the neighborhood, a place where people who could find not just resources but also dignity and a sense of belonging. Mia thrived in their blended family. She had the best of both worlds, a father who taught her how to fix a leaky faucet and a mother who taught her how to read a balance sheet. She was a child of two legacies, one of grit and one of grace, and she carried them both with a wisdom beyond her years. One evening, as they were celebrating the first anniversary of the community center, a young woman approached Leo. She was a single mother who had just completed a nursing program through one of the center's grants. "I just wanted to thank you," she said, her eyes filled with tears. "You and your wife, you changed my life. You gave me a future I never thought I could have." Leo smiled and squeezed Alara's hand. "We didn't give you anything," he said. "We just gave you the tools you already had. Everything else you needed inside you." As the woman walked away, Alara leaned her head on Leo's shoulder. "I love you," she whispered. "I love the man you are, the father you are, the partner you are." He kissed the top of her head, his heart full. "I love you too," he replied. "Thank you for being my Ellie." They stood there for a long time, watching the people in the community center, laughing, talking, learning, growing. They had created this place of hope, this testament to the power of love and kindness, and they had done it together. They had taken their two different worlds and woven them into a single, beautiful story, a story that was still being written, a story that would continue to inspire and change lives for years to come, because they had learned the most important lesson of all, that true wealth is not measured in dollars or stock prices, but in the love you give, the lives you touch, and the hope you build in the hearts of others.